Now, most people look at gold and silver prices and ask the same thing straight away. Have I missed out? Gold's gone up, headlines are shouting, everyone suddenly cares, and the fear kicks in. I should have bought years ago, but here's the truth, and this really does matter. The real question isn't, is it too late? The real question is, why is this happening now? Because gold doesn't move like shares. It explodes because of hype. It moves when the foundations underneath the system start shifting. And that's exactly what's going on. What most people see are numbers on a screen. What they don't see is who's buying, why they're buying, and what they're protecting themselves from. And no, this isn't about getting rich quick. Gold doesn't do that. Gold does something far more boring and far more important. It protects. It protects when currencies weaken, it protects when confidence disappears, and it protects when the rules quietly change. Now, I've been in this trade for 35 years and I've seen bubbles, crashes, panics, and all sorts of problems. Every single time, gold really matters. It's before the crowd understands what's going on, not after. So if you're watching this thinking, have I missed the boat? You haven't. You're just standing on the shore, looking at the wrong things, because the real story isn't the price. It's who's buying gold right now and what they know that most people don't. And that's what we're going to get into next. So if the price isn't the story, the question next becomes obvious. Who's actually buying gold right now? Because it's not TikTok traders, it's not people panicking at the last minute, it's governments, it's central banks. They're quietly buying consistently and in record amounts. Countries like China, Russia, Turkey, they've been stacking gold year after year. Not because it's shiny, not because it's fashionable, but because gold sits outside the system. It doesn't rely on another country's promise. It doesn't depend on interest rates. It can't be printed when things get uncomfortable. And here's the part most people miss. Central banks don't buy it at the top because they're late. They buy before confidence disappears, not after. When they start moving heavily into gold, it's a signal, not a headline, it's a warning light. And this isn't theory, it's history. Every major financial reset, every currency wobble, every debt spiral, gold gets quietly hoarded first, while the public is distracted by the noise. That's why watching the price alone is very dangerous. Price reacts after decisions are made. Smart money moves before the story hits the news. So when people ask, why is gold rising now? The answer isn't fear, it's preparation. And once you understand that, the next thing you need to ask isn't, should I buy gold? It's, what exactly are we preparing for? And that's where things starts getting really interesting. So if central banks are preparing, the real question becomes, what are they preparing for? Now let's keep this simple. Governments are drowning in debt, not a bit high debt, mathematically impossible debt. Trillions stacked on trillions. And the key word here is stacked, because none of it ever gets paid off. It just gets rolled over and rolled over again. Now here's the part most people don't realise. Governments don't repay debt the way you repay a mortgage. They don't tighten their belt and chip away at it. They inflate it away. They make the money worth less, so the debt looks smaller, even though nothing's actually been fixed. That's why food costs more. That's why energy costs more. That's why savings quietly shrink even when your balance stays the same. And this isn't an accident, it's how the system survives. Gold doesn't fix the debt, but it does one very important thing. It refuses to be diluted. You can't print more gold. You can't email it into existence. And you can't quietly change the rules on it overnight without people noticing. That's why when debt gets out of control, gold gets uncomfortable and suddenly very attractive. So again, the real question isn't, is gold expensive? It is, what's happening when the debt can't be hidden anymore? And once you see what usually comes after that, you'll understand why gold has always played the same role every single time. Now, when people hear money printing, they imagine chaos, wheelbarrows, hyperinflation, total collapse. But that's not how it usually happens. It's quieter than that, slower, more polite. Instead of saying we're printing money, governments are saying things like stimulus, support packages, liquidity, energy measures, different words, same results. More money chasing the same amount of stuff. And here's the trick: when they print money, prices don't rise all at once. They rise unevenly. Assets go first, then it's stocks, property, collectibles, and yes, gold. Wages come later, savings come last, if at all. That's why people feel like they're working harder but getting nowhere, because the measuring stick keeps shrinking. Gold doesn't benefit from money printing because it's clever. It benefits because it's outside the system. It doesn't rely on a promise, and it doesn't rely on confidence, and it doesn't care what the interest rate is. When money gets easier to create, gold gets harder to ignore. And this is the moment people always miss. The real shift doesn't happen when inflation explodes. It happens before, which leads us to the next question you should be really asking: who's already positioned themselves before everyone else catches on? Now let's talk about that. Now here's the part most people never see. While the headlines are arguing, while social media is distracted, while the average person's asking is it too late, someone else is already buying. Not influencers, not YouTubers, not day traders, but central banks. Now over the last few years, central banks around the world have been quietly stacking gold at the fastest pace in decades. China, Russia, India, Turkey, they're not doing it for clicks, they're not doing it for hype, they're doing it because they understand one simple thing: paper promises don't survive long-term stress. When trust in currency starts to wobble, gold becomes the neutral asset. No counterparty risk, no default risk, no political alliance, just weight and pure purity. And here's what's important: central banks don't buy at the top, they buy before the public wakes up. By the time everyday investors feel confident enough to pile in, the price has already moved. That's why this always feels uncomfortable. Gold never looks exciting when it's just doing its job. It looks boring, old-fashioned, unnecessary, until suddenly it doesn't. And that brings us on to the real mistake people make. They treat gold like a trade instead of what it actually is, which is where the story really turns. Let's talk about what gold is actually for and what it isn't. Now here's where people get it wrong. They ask, is gold going to double? Is it going to crash? Should I wait for a pullback? That's the wrong questions. Gold isn't an investment in the way shares or property are. It doesn't generate income. It doesn't rely on growth. And it doesn't promise you anything. And that's exactly why it works. Gold's job isn't to make you rich. Its job is to stop you from getting poorer. When currencies lose value, gold doesn't magically go up. Money goes down. That's an important distinction. If gold looks expensive, it usually because the currency you're measuring it is weaker than it used to be. Gold hasn't changed. The ruler has. And this is why gold quietly sits in the background while other assets boom and bust. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't trend on social media. It just preserves purchasing power over long periods of time. That's why central banks hold it. And that's why it's still here after thousands of years. And that's why every major financial reset in history ends up with gold still standing. So the real question isn't, will gold go higher? It's this: what happens if everything else goes lower? And to understand that, we need to look at what's happening when confidence in money finally cracks. And this is where the story gets very interesting. Now, money only works as long as people believe in it. That's the part most people miss. A pound note isn't backed by gold anymore. It's backed by confidence, by trust that tomorrow it will still buy roughly what it buys today. And history shows us what happens when trust breaks. It doesn't break all at once. It cracks slowly. At first, prices creep up. Then savings start to feel smaller. Then wages don't stretch as far as they used to. People don't panic straight away. They adapt. They cut back. They borrow more. And they assume it will sort itself out. Until it doesn't. This is where gold changes roles. It stops being an old-fashioned metal and becomes a reference point. Not because it pays interest, not because it grows, but because when confidence grows, gold doesn't need it. It isn't a promise. It isn't a policy decision. It isn't printed, paused, frozen, or redefined. It just exists. And this is why in every serious monetary crisis, whether it's inflation, currency resets, or debt collapse, gold doesn't disappear. It quietly reasserts itself, not as a get-rich-quick asset, but as a measure of what real value actually looks like when the noise fades away. And once you understand that, you start seeing today's headlines very differently, because the real issue isn't gold at all. It's what happened to everything priced against it. Now here's where most people get this wrong. They asked, is gold going to go up? That's the wrong question. The real question you should be asking is this: what is everything else going down against? Gold isn't trying to win a race. It isn't competing with shares, property, or crypto. Gold is a measuring stick. When currencies weaken, gold doesn't magically become more valuable. Money becomes less useful. That's a huge difference. Now, if gold doubles in price, it doesn't mean gold changed. It means the unit you're measuring with did. This is why gold looks boring during good times. When confidence is high, people don't need a baseline. But when debt balloons, when money is created faster than valued, when trust starts wobbling, gold quietly does its job. It tells the truth. And that truth isn't exciting, it's uncomfortable. It shows you how much purchasing power has leaked away over time, how savings shrink without being touched, how safe money isn't always safe at all. This is why serious investors don't use gold to chase upside, they use it to anchor reality. And once you see gold that way, you stop worrying about timing the market, because you realize you're not placing a bet, you're setting a reference point, one that outlived every currency system before it. And that brings us on to something most people never think about. What happens when everyone realizes this all at the same time? Now here's a pattern that repeats every single time. When gold is quiet, nobody wants it. It's ignored, it's dismissed, called outdated. But when confidence finally cracks, people don't ease into gold. They rush, not calmly, emotionally. That's when headlines flip. That's when queues form. That's when people ask, why didn't I look at this earlier? And by then, the easy decisions are gone. This isn't theory, it's history. The public never buys gold at the start of uncertainty. They buy it once the problem is obvious, once inflation is undeniable, once savings visibly shrink, once currencies start wobbling in real time. That's why people move in bursts. Long periods of boredom followed by sharp, uncomfortable repricing. The people who feel calm during those moments aren't smarter, they're earlier. They didn't wait for permission from headlines, they didn't wait for certainty. They understood that gold isn't about predicting the future, it's about preparing for it. And this is the part that matters the most. You don't need to panic, you don't need to go all in, you don't need to become an expert. You just need to understand what gold actually is doing here, because once the rush starts, education turns into regret. And that's why the final question isn't, is gold too expensive? It's this: what does it cost to ignore it completely? So let's bring this back to reality. This video isn't about telling you to rush out and buy gold. It's not about predictions, prices, or panic. It's about understanding the system you're living in. Gold has survived every version of money we've ever created. Empires, currencies, debt cycles, financial resets. Not because it's exciting, but because it's honest. Now, after 35 years in a trade, here's what I know for certain. People who understand gold sleep better than people who don't. Not because they think they're making rich, but because they understand what it protects them from. Now, if you want to learn how gold and silver actually work, how they fit into the real world, not the internet version, I've put together a free guide that breaks it all down simply and clearly. No jargon, no hype, just the facts. You'll find the link below, and if you found this video really useful, please subscribe to this channel. We'll keep going on cutting through the noise and explaining things properly. Now, I'm James at Blackwell Jewelers. Thank you for watching.